Rain pours heavily over a lonely city street. A pregnant homeless woman, shivering under a broken umbrella, hears faint cries from a nearby alley. When she follows the sound, she finds a lost little boy, trembling and calling for his mother. Without a second thought, she wraps him in her coat, whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now." She has no idea that this boy belongs to the richest family in the city and that helping him will soon change her life forever. The city never sleeps, but for those who have nothing, its lights only remind them of how dark their own world has become. Under the fading glow of a flickering street lamp, a young woman sat on a torn blanket, clutching her swollen belly as the cold night wind howled through the empty alley. Her name was Grace Miller, a name that once echoed with promise, laughter, and hope. But now, it was whispered by the streets, spoken by no one but herself. Her hands, once soft and adorned with a small silver ring from better days, were now rough from months of hardship. She rubbed them together, trying to steal a bit of warmth from her fading breath. The smell of rain lingered in the air, heavy with the scent of asphalt and despair. Every passing car threw a splash of muddy water near her feet, but she barely flinched. She had learned not to react. The world had stopped noticing her long ago. Grace was 7 months pregnant, yet she wandered each day without certainty of food, shelter, or safety. The father of her child, the man she once believed would protect her, had disappeared the moment he learned she was expecting. His promises of love and family evaporated like morning mist, leaving her alone with a growing life inside her and no place to call home. She survived on kindness from strangers, though it was rare. A few coins dropped in her paper cup, an unfinished sandwich left behind on a park bench, or a half-empty bottle of water shared by another soul in the same plight. Still, despite her struggles, Grace's heart remained unbroken in one regard. She believed in doing good, even when life offered her nothing in return. Every morning, she sat near the same coffee shop downtown. Through the large window, she watched people dressed in suits hurry by with steaming cups and phones pressed to their ears. She often imagined herself among them, working, smiling, carrying a sense of purpose. Sometimes she would whisper to her unborn child, "One day, sweetheart, you'll never know this kind of pain." I promise. That promise was all she had to hold on to. One cold evening, the sky turned grey and heavy, signaling another storm. Grace gathered her few belongings: a worn blanket, a plastic bag with an old sweater, and a small teddy bear she had found in the trash. She pressed the bear gently against her stomach. "This is for you," she whispered softly. "It's not much, but it's something." The streets began to empty as raindrops started to fall. Most people ran for shelter, ducking under canopies or jumping into taxis. Grace, however, had nowhere to go. She pulled her oversized coat tighter and hurried toward the abandoned bus station on 9th Street, the only place where she could sit without being shooed away by security guards. Inside, the station was cold and echoing, its benches rusty and walls covered in graffiti. But it was dry. Grace sat down, rubbing her aching feet. Her stomach tightened with hunger. She had not eaten since morning, but she ignored it. Instead, she focused on the sound of the rain tapping on the cracked roof above, like a lullaby for her restless soul. She leaned back, whispering prayers she barely remembered. Her eyelids grew heavy, but sleep rarely came easy. The city's night noises were cruel companions. The rumble of distant traffic, the bark of stray dogs, the occasional shouts of people fighting over scraps. She placed one hand over her belly again. "I know you're hungry too," she murmured. "But we'll make it. We have to." And yet, despite her exhaustion, there was a quiet strength about her, a glow that came not from comfort, but from courage. Life had taken everything from Grace, except her ability to care, and she guarded that kindness like a flame against the wind. Hours passed, and the rain grew heavier. Thunder rolled over the skyline, shaking the ground beneath her. She thought of moving to find somewhere warmer, but her body refused to rise. Then in that still moment between thunderclaps, she heard it, a faint sound, distant but unmistakable. A child's cry. Grace froze, lifting her head slowly. The sound came again, soft, frightened, and echoing through the empty streets outside. Her tired eyes widened and instinct took over. Despite her fatigue, despite the ache in her back and the rain pouring down, she pushed herself to her feet. She grabbed her blanket, threw it over her shoulders, and stepped into the storm. Each step was heavy, her shoes soaked and slipping on the wet pavement. But she followed the cry, a sound that pierced through the rain like a plea from heaven itself. She had no idea that this moment, this single act of compassion, would soon lead her into the world of the richest family in the city and change her life forever. The rain had grown merciless, slashing through the streets like needles of ice. Water gushed along the gutters, carrying leaves, trash, and fragments of forgotten lives. Grace moved through it, her coat soaked, her breath trembling in the cold air. She held her stomach protectively as another thunderclap roared overhead. The cry came again, faint, trembling but unmistakably human, a child's voice echoing through the empty block. Grace turned her head, scanning the shadows. The sound seemed to be coming from a narrow alley behind a row of shuttered shops. Every instinct told her to stay away. Dark alleys rarely brought good things, but the thought of a child alone in this storm pulled at her heart stronger than fear ever could. "Hello?" she called out, her voice shaky but gentle.
Is someone there?
No answer came, only the dripping of rain from the rooftops and the rustling of wind against old posters on the walls. Grace hesitated, shivering from the cold. Then, through the dim glow of a flickering streetlight, she saw movement. A small figure crouched near a dumpster, hugging his knees. Her heart clenched. It was a boy, no older than 6, maybe 7. His clothes were expensive but drenched, his sneakers covered in mud. His tiny hands were trembling as he rubbed his eyes, trying to stop his tears. Grace approached slowly, careful not to frighten him. "Hey there," she whispered, kneeling a few feet away. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" The boy looked up, startled. His big blue eyes shimmered with fear and confusion. I don't know where I am," he stammered through chattering teeth. "I can't find my nanny. She was on the phone, and I saw a puppy across the street, and He stopped to gasp, his small chest heaving. "I ran after it, and then the car, and I got lost." Grace's heart ached as she listened. His designer jacket and silver wristband clearly didn't belong to an ordinary child. But here he was, alone, scared and shivering in the rain, just another lost soul in a city that rarely cared. She took off her thin, tattered coat and wrapped it gently around him. "It's okay," she said softly. "You're safe now. We'll find your nanny, I promise." Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from compassion. The boy sniffled and looked up at her.
Who are you?
"My name's Grace," she said with a faint smile. "What's yours?" "Ethan," he whispered. "My dad says I should never talk to strangers." Grace smiled sadly. "Your dad sounds smart, but right now I think even he would want you to have a friend." A small smile flickered on Ethan's face. The first one of the night. She lifted him carefully to his feet, her body aching from the weight and her pregnancy, but she ignored the pain. "Come on, Ethan, let's get you somewhere dry, okay?" He nodded and clung to her hand tightly, the trust of a child, fragile and pure. Together, they stepped back onto the sidewalk, the rain cascading over them like a curtain. Grace looked around for a place to stay. The stores were closed, the shelters full, and the police station was miles away. Then she saw a 24-hour laundromat across the street, its neon sign buzzing weakly in the rain. It wasn't warm, but it was dry. She hurried them across, shielding Ethan with her arms as cars splashed through puddles. Inside, the laundromat was almost empty, just the hum of old washing machines and the faint scent of detergent. She led Ethan to a bench in the corner and helped him out of his wet shoes. "Better?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded, still sniffling. "A little." Grace searched her bag and found a half-dry piece of bread wrapped in tissue. She hesitated. It was all she had left. But then she handed it to him without a word. He looked at it uncertainly. "Aren't you hungry?" Grace smiled, brushing his damp hair back from his forehead. "Not as much as you are." He began to eat slowly, watching her with curious eyes. There was something about her, Tired but kind, fragile but brave. She didn't talk like the people he knew. She spoke with warmth, as if every word was meant to comfort. After a while, he asked softly, "Why are you outside? Don't you have a home?" Grace paused. The question pierced her like a blade. She looked away, pretending to adjust the wet blanket around her shoulders. "Not right now," she said gently, "but that's okay. Sometimes people lose their way for a little while. What matters is finding it again." Ethan frowned, thinking deeply for a boy his age. "My dad says people who work hard never end up on the streets." Grace gave a faint smile, her eyes dim with memories. "Maybe your dad is right. But sometimes life has its own plans. And when it does, you just keep walking." Ethan nodded slowly, though he didn't fully understand. He leaned against her arm, exhausted. Within minutes, the boy's eyes began to close. Grace watched him, a soft ache rising in her chest. She brushed a strand of hair from his face and whispered, "Sleep, little one. You're safe." As he drifted off, she hummed a lullaby, one her mother used to sing when the world still felt kind. Her voice was low and trembling, but it filled the cold, empty room with warmth. Outside, the rain finally began to ease. The storm had passed, but neither of them knew that this quiet night, a homeless woman sharing her last piece of bread with a stranger's child, was about to ignite a chain of events that would change both their lives. Forever, the steady hum of the old washing machines filled the silence of the laundromat, their rhythmic whirring blending with the occasional drip of rain outside. The city's noise had quieted, leaving only the soft sound of water spinning in metal drums and the faint crackle of the neon sign flickering above the door. Grace sat quietly beside the little boy, watching him sleep with his head resting on her lap. Ethan's face, peaceful now, looked almost angelic under the dim fluorescent light. His golden hair clung to his forehead, and his small hand still held tightly onto the edge of her coat, as if afraid she might disappear while he dreamed. For a long time, Grace just sat there, listening to the sound of his breathing. It had been months since she had felt the warmth of another person so close, the comfort of being needed. The life growing inside her often reminded her she was not entirely alone. But this small boy seeking safety in her arms filled a space in her heart she hadn't realized had gone so empty. Her stomach growled softly, but she ignored it. Hunger had become familiar, almost ordinary. She had learned to endure it. What mattered now was that the child beside her was safe. She glanced toward the window. The rain was easing, replaced by the misty calm that follows every storm. Drops trickled down the glass, catching the glow of streetlights outside. The world beyond looked almost gentle now, as if taking a breath after a long cry. Grace looked down again and smiled faintly. "You must be someone's whole world," she whispered to the sleeping boy. "And tonight, you're mine too." She leaned back against the cold metal wall, exhaustion weighing heavy on her shoulders. Her mind wandered, tracing memories she usually buried. A warm kitchen, laughter, her mother's gentle voice reading bedtime stories. Those days felt like a different lifetime. She wondered if her baby would ever know such warmth. As her eyes began to close, Ethan stirred, his small voice breaking the stillness. "Grace," he murmured sleepily. "Yes, sweetheart? Did you ever have a house like mine?" The question caught her off guard. She smiled softly. "Once, a long time ago," she said. "What happened to it?" Grace hesitated, her fingers brushing his hair. "Life got a little hard. Sometimes things don't go the way we plan. But it's okay. I still have hope." Ethan blinked up at her, his curiosity innocent and unfiltered. "My dad says hope is for people who don't work hard enough." Grace chuckled quietly, not mocking him, but amused at the simplicity of a child repeating what he'd heard. "Your dad sounds like a man who's never been truly alone," she said gently. "Hope isn't weakness, Ethan. It's what keeps people like me standing when the world tells us to fall." The boy nodded slowly, his little brow furrowing as if trying to understand. "You talk like my grandma," he said at last. "She always tells me to be kind because you never know what someone's going through." Grace smiled warmly. "Your grandma sounds very wise." "She is," Ethan said proudly. but she's sick right now. That's why Daddy's always sad. Grace's expression softened. I'm sorry to hear that. Ethan looked down at the floor, his voice trembling. Sometimes I wish Daddy would hug me more. He's always on his phone or talking to people. He says he's busy helping the world, but he never helps me. A lump formed in Grace's throat. She had met many rich people in her old life, before everything fell apart, and she knew that loneliness wasn't just found in the streets. Sometimes it hid behind marble walls and silk curtains. She placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Maybe he just doesn't know how to show it. Some people love deeply but forget how to say it out loud. Ethan nodded, but his eyes grew glassy. I just want him to see me, he whispered. Grace felt tears sting her eyes. She wanted to tell him that one day his father would realize how lucky he was. But she had learned that promises meant nothing if they were spoken too easily. So instead, she simply said, "He will, Ethan. One day, he will." The boy gave a small, hopeful smile. "You sound like my teacher," he said softly. "She says people who help others are heroes." "Are you a hero?" Grace laughed lightly, shaking her head. "No, sweetheart. I'm just someone trying to make it through another night. But you saved me," he said firmly, his voice small but full of conviction. Grace looked at him, her chest tightening. No one had called her anything kind in a very long time. "Maybe you saved me too," she whispered. Ethan tilted his head, confused. "How?" "Because for the first time in a while," she said, smiling faintly, "I don't feel invisible anymore." The boy thought for a moment, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small keychain, a golden one shaped like a star. "You can keep this," he said, pressing it into her palm. "It's my lucky charm." "Oh, Ethan." "I can't take this," she said softly. "It's okay," he insisted. "You need luck more than me." Grace's eyes glistened. She looked at the tiny star resting in her trembling hand and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Warmth. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "I'll treasure it." The night grew quieter. The boy's breathing slowed again, and soon he was fast asleep, curled beside her on the bench, his head resting near her shoulder. Grace watched him for a long while, feeling his small heartbeat against her arm. It reminded her of the little one still growing within her. Two innocent souls who deserved far more than the world had given them. As dawn began to creep through the laundromat windows, painting the floor with pale gold, Grace knew what she had to do next. She couldn't let the boy's family suffer any longer. Somewhere out there, a father was searching desperately for his son. With a deep breath, she looked down at Ethan and whispered, "It's time to take you home." Little one. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that bringing him home would soon take her to a place she never imagined entering. The mansion of one of the city's most powerful billionaires. And there, her act of kindness would be met not with gratitude, but with accusation. The first light of dawn crept shyly through the gray sky, painting the rain-soaked streets in silver hues. The storm had passed, leaving puddles scattered across the pavement like pieces of a broken mirror. Inside the laundromat, Grace stirred awake, her body stiff and aching from the cold metal bench. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she felt a gentle weight against her arm. Ethan, still sleeping peacefully beside her, his small fingers curled around her coat sleeve. Grace smiled faintly. He's safe. That was all that mattered, but safety was fragile, and she knew this couldn't last. Somewhere out there, parents were desperate, searching, perhaps even fearing the worst. And the longer she waited, the more questions there would be. Questions she might not have the strength to answer. She gently shook Ethan's shoulder. "Hey, sweetheart." "Wake up." The boy stirred, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Is it morning?" "It is," Grace said softly. "And we need to find your family." Ethan blinked, still half dreaming. "You'll come with me, right?" "Of course," she said with a reassuring smile, though a quiet fear tugged at her heart. She wasn't sure how the world would treat someone like her, walking into a police station with a lost child. A pregnant homeless woman in torn clothes, holding a boy who clearly belonged to privilege, but she pushed the thought aside. Doing the right thing had to matter more than what people thought. Grace helped Ethan put his damp jacket back on and wrapped her blanket around his shoulders to keep him warm. Together, they stepped outside into the chilly morning air. The city was waking up. Delivery trucks rumbled down the streets, commuters hurried to catch buses, and shopkeepers lifted metal shutters with sleepy sighs. Ethan held her hand tightly as they walked. "Grace," he said softly, "do you think my dad's worried?" Grace smiled faintly. "I think your dad hasn't slept all night." He looked down. "He always says he doesn't cry, but maybe he's crying now." Grace squeezed his hand gently. "Maybe he is. Love makes even the strongest people cry sometimes." As they approached the nearest police station, Grace hesitated outside the glass doors. The building looked clean and imposing, with uniformed officers moving briskly inside. For a moment, fear gripped her. What if they didn't believe her story? What if they thought she had taken the boy? She looked down at Ethan, who gave her a small, trusting smile. "It's okay, Grace. You're with me." His innocence gave her courage. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. Inside, the room buzzed with low chatter, ringing phones, and the tapping of keyboards. An officer at the front desk glanced up, a young man with tired eyes and a coffee cup in his hand. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked, his gaze flicking from Grace's worn clothes to the boy holding her hand. Grace swallowed hard. "Yes, officer, I found this boy last night. He was lost in the rain." The officer straightened. "Lost? What's your name, son?" "Ethan," the boy replied shyly. "Ethan Bennett," the officer froze. His eyes widened. "Ethan Bennett? The missing boy from the news?" Grace's heart skipped a beat. "Missing?" Before she could speak, the officer quickly picked up the phone, murmuring into it urgently. "Yes, I have him. He's here. Yes, safe. Send them immediately." Grace stepped back slightly, confused and uneasy. "What's going on?" The officer looked at her almost in disbelief. "Ma'am, this boy has been missing since last night. The city's been searching for him. His father, Mr. Richard Bennett, is one of the most powerful businessmen in the state. There's been a massive reward announced for any information." Grace's lips parted in shock. She looked at Ethan, who seemed just as surprised. Your father's a billionaire?" she whispered. Ethan nodded hesitantly. "He builds tall buildings and talks on TV a lot, but he's just dad to me." Grace forced a smile, even as her stomach tightened. "Well, then I guess it's time to take you home, little one." Within minutes, the police station turned into a whirlwind of activity. News of the boy's return spread quickly. 2 senior officers arrived, offering Ethan a blanket and a cup of cocoa, while others made calls and prepared statements. Grace stood silently near the wall, feeling suddenly out of place, her clothes damp, her hair tangled, her hands trembling. She didn't belong in this clean, ordered world. All she wanted was to make sure the boy was safe before quietly slipping away. Then came the sound of tires screeching outside. A black luxury car, sleek and spotless, pulled up at the curb. The door flew open, and a tall man in an expensive overcoat rushed inside, his face pale with panic. His eyes locked instantly on the boy. "Ethan!" "Daddy!" Ethan cried, running into his arms. The man dropped to his knees, holding his son tightly, tears streaming down his face. "Oh, thank God. Thank God you're safe." Grace stood back, her eyes softening at the sight. For a brief moment, she felt peace. Her mission was complete. She turned slightly, preparing to leave, but before she could take a step, another voice cut through the air. "Wait, who's that woman?" It was a second man, one of the billionaire's security guards, pointing at Grace suspiciously. The billionaire rose slowly, still holding Ethan protectively. His sharp eyes scanned Grace from head to toe, the torn coat, the tired face, the swollen belly. She's the one who found me, Daddy," Ethan said quickly. "She helped me when I was lost," but the man's expression darkened. "Or perhaps she found you because she took you," he said coldly. "You expect me to believe a homeless woman just happened to save my son in the middle of the night?" Grace froze, stunned. "Sir, who are you really?" he demanded, stepping closer. "What were you doing with him?" "Please," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I found him crying in the rain. I didn't want him to be alone." The man's jaw tightened. "And now you show up here, the day after a multi-million-dollar reward is announced?" How convenient. The officers shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Grace's face burned with shame and helplessness. She wanted to shout, to defend herself, but the weight of her circumstances silenced her. To them, she was just another vagrant, someone easy to doubt. Ethan pulled at his father's coat. "Daddy, stop!" "She saved me. She gave me her coat and bread." But Mr. Bennett barely seemed to hear him. His fury and fear had clouded his judgment. He turned away, holding Ethan close. "Take her name," he said curtly to the officer. "If this is some kind of stunt, I'll make sure she pays for it." Grace lowered her head. The words cut deeper than any wound. She took a slow step backward, clutching her blanket around her shoulders. "I don't want your money," she whispered. "I just wanted him to be safe." And before anyone could stop her, she turned and walked out of the station into the pale morning light, her tears blending with the last remnants of rain behind her. Ethan pressed his face into his father's coat, crying softly. "Daddy, you're wrong. She's good. She's kind." Mr. Bennett said nothing. But deep down, a shadow of guilt had already begun to stir, a feeling that would soon haunt him more than he could imagine, because the truth, as he was about to learn, had a way of finding its voice. The Bennett mansion sat high on a hill overlooking the city, a fortress of glass and stone, surrounded by perfectly trimmed gardens and guarded by silence. Inside, the tension was thick. Servants moved quietly through the halls, afraid to speak, while reporters gathered beyond the iron gates, their cameras flashing in the distance. In the grand living room, Richard Bennett, one of the wealthiest men in the city, sat on the edge of an ivory sofa, holding his son tightly. The boy's small arms were wrapped around his father's waist, his face buried against him. The warmth of that embrace should have brought comfort, yet Richard's heart felt strangely heavy. He had his son back, safe, alive, but the relief was clouded by confusion and doubt. "Tell me again," he said quietly, looking down at Ethan. "Where exactly did she find you?" Ethan's eyes were red from crying. "I told you, Daddy. I ran away to follow a puppy. Then I got lost and it started raining. And she found me. She helped me." "She?" Richard asked, his tone cold. "Grace," Ethan said softly. "She gave me her coat, even though she was cold. She shared her bread. She sang to me so I wouldn't be scared." Richard's jaw clenched. The memory of that woman's face flickered in his mind. Tired eyes, tangled hair, worn clothes clinging to her like faded memories. Her voice echoed faintly. "I just wanted him to be safe." He stood up abruptly, turning toward the window. Rain had begun again, tapping against the glass like guilt knocking at his conscience. He spoke without turning around. "Ethan, do you know what kind of people live on the streets?" The boy looked confused. "People like Grace?" Richard nodded. "Yes, some of them aren't what they seem. They lie. They take advantage of others. But not Grace." Ethan interrupted, his voice breaking. "She didn't want anything. She said she didn't even want money. She just wanted to help." Richard turned sharply, startled by his son's defiance. Ethan's eyes blazed with conviction, the kind of truth only a child could hold. "She's kind, Daddy," Ethan whispered, tears forming again. "You were mean to her." The words hit harder than Richard expected. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Instead, he turned away, hiding behind the excuse of exhaustion. "Go upstairs, son. You need to rest." Ethan didn't move. "You need to say sorry," Richard froze. The innocence of the statement felt like a mirror held up to his soul. "Ethan, please, you always tell me to do what's right," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "But you didn't." Then he ran upstairs, leaving his father standing in silence. Richard exhaled slowly, rubbing his forehead. He had faced corporate wars, media scandals, political battles, yet nothing unsettled him like the disappointment in his son's eyes. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and walked toward his study. The house was quiet except for the sound of rain and the occasional creak of the old wooden floor. When he entered, his assistant Mark was waiting by the desk, holding a tablet. "Sir, I think you should see this." Richard frowned. "What is it?" "It's the CCTV footage from the area where Ethan was found. The police gathered it this morning." Mark pressed play. The screen showed a narrow street under heavy rain. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m., the night before. Richard watched closely as the footage revealed a figure moving through the storm, a woman heavily pregnant, clutching her coat. Then she stopped, turning toward the sound of something unseen. Moments later, she crouched down beside a small boy huddled near a dumpster. Richard leaned forward. The boy was Ethan. He watched as the woman, Grace, wrapped her thin coat around his son, lifted him gently, and led him out of the alley. She shielded him from the rain, guiding him carefully across the slippery street, ignoring her own discomfort. Later footage from a nearby store camera showed her carrying Ethan into the laundromat, sitting beside him and tucking him in with her blanket. Not once did she look at a camera. Not once did she search for attention. Every gesture was quiet, selfless, human. Richard's hand tightened around the glass, his throat dry. Mark spoke softly. "There's more, sir. The officers at the station confirmed her story. Matches the timeline exactly. She didn't know who Ethan was. She even refused to give her full name before leaving." The billionaire said nothing. He simply stared at the screen, at the image of the woman's tired eyes, filled with gentleness even in the pouring rain. For the first time in years, Richard Bennett felt something break inside him. Shame. He set down the glass, the sound echoing through the silent room. His reflection in the window looked nothing like the man he wanted to be. Powerful, respected, admired. In that moment, all he saw was a father blinded by fear and pride, who had turned suspicion on the one person who had saved his child. He whispered under his breath, "What have I done?" The next morning, Richard's sleek black car rolled quietly through the poorer side of the city. The chauffeur glanced nervously in the rearview mirror as they passed under a rusted bridge and rows of graffiti-covered walls. "Sir, are you sure this is the place?" Richard nodded grimly. "She's here somewhere." He had asked the police for her last known location, an abandoned bus station where she had been seen resting before the storm. When they arrived, the sight hit him harder than he expected. There, beneath the bridge, sat Grace, her coat pulled tightly around her, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. Her hair was damp, her shoes muddy, and yet, even in that state, there was a quiet dignity about her, the kind that wealth could never buy. Richard stepped out of the car, his polished shoes splashing into a puddle. Grace looked up, startled. For a moment, she didn't recognize him. "Mr. Bennett," she said quietly, her voice wary. He approached slowly, his tone gentle, so different from before. "Grace, I came to apologize." She blinked, uncertain if she had heard him correctly.
Apologize?
"Yes," he exhaled deeply. "I was wrong, terribly wrong. You saved my son, and instead of thanking you, I doubted you. I saw what I wanted to see, not the truth." Grace looked down, her eyes glistening but steady. "You don't owe me anything, sir." "I didn't do it for a reward." "I know," Richard said. "That's what makes it harder to forgive myself." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This is not payment. It's a chance, for you and for your child. I want to help you get back on your feet. You deserve better." Grace hesitated. "I can't take this." "I didn't do it for money." Richard's voice softened. "Then take it for Ethan. He hasn't stopped talking about you. You gave him something I never could, kindness without condition." For a long moment, they stood in silence as the morning breeze carried the sounds of the city, distant traffic, the whistle of a train, a new day beginning. Grace finally nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett," he smiled faintly. "No, Grace, thank you. You reminded me what truly matters." At that moment, a small car door opened and Ethan came running out, holding a small paper bag. "Grace!" he cried, sprinting toward her. She knelt down as he threw his arms around her. "Hey there, little one," she said warmly. "You doing okay?" "I missed you," he said, looking up at her with a grin. "Daddy says we can see you again soon." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of peace this time, the kind that came after a storm. As she hugged the boy, Richard looked on, realizing that this woman, broken, homeless, forgotten by the world, had shown more humanity than he ever had in all his wealth. And in that quiet moment, He made a silent promise to honor the grace that had saved not only his son's life, but also his own heart. The morning sun crept gently over the city skyline, bathing the streets in a soft golden hue. For the first time in many months, Grace walked not with uncertainty, but with quiet purpose. The envelope Richard Bennett had given her lay, carefully folded in her pocket, but it wasn't the paper or the money that mattered. It was what it represented, a chance at dignity. That evening, she sat by the small window of a women's shelter, watching the world outside move on as she cradled her growing belly. The faint hum of the city blended with the echoes of laughter from other women nearby. Survivors, dreamers, fighters. Grace smiled faintly. She had never imagined she would find peace in such a place. Her thoughts drifted to Ethan, his laughter, his innocent questions, the way he had held her hand so tightly that night in the rain. Somewhere deep inside, she knew their paths had crossed for a reason. Perhaps fate had placed her in that alley not by accident, but by divine design, so two lost souls could save each other. A gentle knock at the door brought her back to the present. "Grace?" a kind voice called. It was the shelter director. "You have a visitor." Grace blinked, startled. "A visitor for me?" "Yes, a man. Says his name is Bennett." Grace's heart skipped. She quickly stood, brushing down her simple dress, nerves tingling. When she stepped into the small reception area, Richard was standing there, not in a tailored suit this time, but in casual clothes, holding a small bouquet of daisies. "Mr. Bennett," she greeted softly. "Please," he said with a humble smile. "Call me Richard." He looked different now. The sharp, commanding CEO had been replaced by a man whose eyes held gratitude instead of pride. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said gently, "but I wanted to see how you were doing." "I'm good," Grace replied, though her voice trembled slightly. "Better than I've been in a long time." "I'm glad," he said sincerely. "I wanted to thank you again. I've been thinking a lot about that night, about everything I said. You made me see what I had become. I've spent my life chasing success, but I forgot what it means to truly live." Grace smiled faintly. "It's easy to forget when the world keeps telling you money is everything." Richard nodded slowly. "You're right. But I want to change that. Not just for me, for others too." He paused, then reached into his briefcase and took out a folder. "I spoke with the directors of my foundation. We've decided to start a program, a shelter and training center for women in crisis. A place where they can rebuild their lives, learn new skills, and find jobs. We'd like to name it." He hesitated, then smiled warmly. "The Grace Foundation." Grace's eyes widened, her lips parting in disbelief. "You're naming it after me?" "Yes," Richard said simply. "Because you reminded me what grace truly means. Mercy without expectation, kindness without reason." Tears welled in her eyes. For years, she had been invisible, just another forgotten face among the countless struggling to survive. Now someone was honoring her name. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Richard replied. "Just promise me one thing. Help me run it. I want you to be part of it. You know these women's struggles better than anyone. You can guide them, inspire them, like you inspired me." Grace covered her mouth with trembling hands. "You mean work for you?" he smiled. "No, work with me." The moment felt surreal. The woman who had once begged for warmth under a bridge was now being offered a position of purpose, not out of pity, but respect. I'd love that," she said at last, her voice breaking. Richard's smile deepened. "Good, then it's settled." Just then, the sound of small footsteps echoed down the hallway. Grace turned, and there he was, Ethan, clutching a drawing in his little hands, his eyes lighting up as soon as he saw her. "Grace," he shouted, running toward her. She knelt, and he threw his arms around her neck. "I missed you." "I missed you too, sweetheart," she said, laughing softly through her tears. "I drew something for you," he said proudly, handing her the picture. It was a crayon drawing of 3 people, Ethan, Grace, and a tiny baby, with a big smile between them. Above them, written in shaky letters, were the words, "Thank you for saving me." Grace's chest tightened. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Ethan grinned. "Daddy says when your baby comes, I can be his big brother sometimes." Grace glanced up at Richard, who nodded with a soft smile. "If you're okay with that," he said. Her eyes shimmered with emotion. "I'd like that very much." For a while, they all sat together in the small, sunlit room, the billionaire, the homeless woman, and the child who had unknowingly united two worlds. There was no wealth or poverty there, no judgment or shame, only gratitude, compassion, and the quiet understanding that kindness could heal wounds money never could. Months passed. The Grace Foundation opened in a renovated old building downtown. Its bright sign glowed above the entrance, welcoming women and children who had nowhere else to turn. Grace stood at the front on opening day, her baby resting peacefully in her arms. She looked out at the crowd, volunteers, families, reporters, and then at Richard and Ethan, standing proudly beside her. When she stepped up to the microphone, her voice trembled but carried strength. "There was a time when I thought the world had forgotten me," she began. "But I learned that even the smallest act of kindness can change everything, not just for one life, but for many. I may have rescued a lost boy that night, but in truth he and his father rescued me too." Applause filled the air. Cameras flashed. But for Grace, the moment wasn't about fame, it was about freedom. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a symbol of hope. As the sun dipped below the skyline, Grace stood outside the new center, watching as the first group of women entered. Richard joined her quietly, holding a bouquet of daisies, just like the first day he'd come to see her. "New beginnings," he said softly. Grace smiled, looking at the sign that bore her name. "And this time," she whispered, "I'm not afraid of the future." Ethan ran up beside them, laughing, his small hand slipping into hers. "Come on, Grace. Let's go help the others." She looked down at him, her heart full. "Let's go, hero." Together they walked inside, 3 lives forever changed by one night of compassion, one act of courage, and one simple truth. Sometimes the poorest person gives the richest lesson. In a world where wealth is measured by numbers, sometimes the greatest fortune is found in the kindness of a heart. Grace was a homeless, pregnant woman with nothing but hope. One night, she chose compassion over fear, giving her coat, her bread, and her courage to a lost child. That small act, unseen by most, unnoticed by the world, changed the lives of 3 people forever. The richest man in the city learned a lesson no business deal could teach. True wealth lies not in money, but in generosity, courage, and love. And the child learned that heroes are not defined by power, but by the hearts that protect and care. One simple choice to help someone in need can ignite ripples of change far beyond imagination. Never underestimate the power of kindness. It can save a life and transform your own. Music fades to a gentle, hopeful note, leaving viewers with a lasting emotional impact.